Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, this week has brought a lot of things up for both my husband and I in trying to figure out how to deal with um, his sister arriving on the scene and all the things that have happened. And it's made me think about a lot of different issues. So, I'm just going to jump in and see what happens here. We were not sure if his sister was still in the area, and we actually managed to find her on Tuesday afternoon and brought her back to our house for a couple of hours and sat down with her. And I tried my best to try and break through the mental confusion and delusion that she had to, you know, get to her core to see if we could have an actual conversation. And her her delusional state is so advanced that it wasn't possible for me to do. She doesn't have any reason to let me in since we don't know each other. So that lack of relationship may have something to do with that, or just because her delusions are just so incredibly ingrained at this point. And I think my husband is right. Ian believes that her stories that she's telling herself are a protection, like a shield that she's put up to keep herself from having to face the reality of what she's gone through and what her life has become and everything else. And so the subject of mental illness and delusional self-talk, storytelling kind of stuff is kind of where our thoughts have been going, naturally speaking, and boundaries and all sorts of other things. In the process of this, she was here for several hours and she left, I guess, Tuesday around 7 o'clock, and this is Saturday, and we haven't seen or heard from her since. So she's making a choice to not accept assistance or help. Her fear of medical procedures and medication and therapy and everything else is extremely heightened. And of course, her reasons for that are grounded in reality. It turns out that her husband actually tried to poison her by doctoring her medication. And so, there are some real world anchors to these fears and anxieties. But she can't separate out uh, those from the reality. She can't see other people. She can't hear other people. She exists in the middle of this story that she's totally committed to. And some of her delusions are like she thinks she's involved in some kind of a police investigation of a giant pedophile ring, and she is the one who can see them. When she does mushrooms, they grow horns on their head. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And considering the fact that, you know, as someone who has seen thought forms coming out of people's heads and experiences the world, the different levels, mental and psychic projections, and being an empath and feeling other people's feelings and so forth, the subject that it brings up is what are the stories that we tell ourselves, and how do we know that they're real, or can we know if they're real? To me, looking at her, it's very clear that this isn't real. There's no grounding in it. There's no common thread in reality. A simple example of it was that she was actually picked up by the police, I guess, on Monday and taken to the hospital, and they shot her up with, I think, lorazepam or something like that. At any rate, to try and calm her down and treat her. And she was convinced that the her backpack, which is now missing, was in the back seat of the police car. And I called the police department. I figured out which police department picked her up. We have like, you know, two cities plus a county sheriff's department and a tribe. So there's like actually four different agencies that, depending on where she was picked up, could have been involved in this. But I was pretty confident which one it was, and I called them, and turned out I was right. And I guess she had told this to other people who had also called on her behalf to try and find her backpack, because they were very agitated by my phone call. They were concerned. They were like annoyed, actually, not concerned, because I guess I wasn't the first person to call, and they were adamant that yes, they had picked her up, and no, she had nothing with her. But relaying this information to her fell on deaf ears. She could not hear the information. She was convinced of her own story. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Was one of the things that's important in doing and, being a witch or a magical person, a person that straddles realities, both physical and spiritual or astral or mental or whatever we want to call these things, being able to tell the differences between an assumption that we're making about reality that may or may not be true, that we can evaluate, and then what is our truth. And it's a very gray and complicated, messy area to even talk about, because we all experience reality differently. Just because we're in different bodies, in different cultures, in different places, in different times of our lives, not just this particular life that we happen to find ourselves in, but our spiritual existence, and how much experience do we have in other lives that is actually coming forward to assist with us, and that kind of thing. And part of shadow work, of course, is identifying some of those things inside of us and figuring out what to do with them. So I was thinking about the assumptions that we make about our reality. And it starts off when we're really little. I mean, it starts off right immediately, because before our brain is formed completely and our personality is formed completely and our identity starts to take shape, we are the center of the entire universe. Everything outside of us feels like it's us. That's sort of the way a child experiences the world. And because of that, depending on the environment we're in, we have different stories and assumptions about reality that we make. I've told you some of mine, like feeling that the universe must absolutely hate me. There must be something horribly wrong with me because of, the things that happened around me, which led to me thinking that if there was indeed something wrong with me, then somehow I was infecting other people with this wrongness that I had, and then they were acting wrong, and I was the cause of that. And that expanded out to, the whole planet, where I felt responsible. If anything happened bad to anybody anywhere on the planet, then it was my fault somehow. And then if something horrible took place, with all the, stories and churches and media and stuff like that about doomsday, the end of the world, the apocalypse, etc., that if indeed that happened, it would also be my fault. And you can see how that small thing that happened when I was little and my experience of my world expanded its way outward and kept going and getting bigger and bigger and more inclusive in everything. And unwinding that and starting to realize my actual part in reality, being an individual, not responsible for other people's actions, not responsible for either their good luck or their bad. It's like it's a definite process. It took a long time. And learning what my assumptions were and figuring out how to challenge those assumptions was part of my healing process and therapy and everything else. But that extends from there into other areas of existence. So things that I've noticed, for example, um, with projection, and this is what that is basically. I projected myself into the universe and then thought everything was reflecting that back to me. Um, we project onto people, and that one seems to be a little bit more obvious, although most people aren't even aware of it. I mean, you see a look on somebody's face and you make an assumption about what they're thinking and how they're feeling without asking a question or without even knowing who they are. And sometimes you might be right, and sometimes you might be completely wrong. You might be making a complete assumption about who they are based on false information. And the false information could just be a cultural difference in how people respond emotionally and what is considered appropriate and inappropriate interactions between two people or groups of people. There's a lot of variance in the world when it comes to what is considered too forward or not forward enough or sneaky. You know, in some cultures, looking at someone directly in the face is considered rude. And in the United States, at least, not looking someone straight in the face is considered like shady, like you're hiding something. You have something that you're hoping someone can't see in you. And so just those really small, basic differences in communication style and body language can get misinterpreted. So you can expand that outward to other things. So we do that, and I know I've done this many times. I think it's sort of an instinctive thing to do. You're trying to understand the world, and so you put yourself in it and try and reflect yourself back. So the projection is not negative or positive, it's just there, and it can be both. My most recent working that I've done for myself has been working on my tendency to positively project on other people and see things there that I would like to see that may not exist at all. And that is just as dangerous as negative projection, where you're projecting negative stuff onto someone and seeing things that aren't there either. It's like there's this fine line between being accurate and perceptive and then being stuck in your own process and not being able to see your own process and the differences between those things. So we don't just project onto other people, we project onto everything around us. And I think one of the best examples of how that works and why we get stuck in our own skin and our own head so easily would be the way people interact with cats. Now, I've read a lot of things, watched a lot of shows about it, had a lot of cats, and one of the funniest thing is we project our body language onto other species, not just other people, but even an entire species. And so when a cat acts a certain way, we do a value judgment that they're being hoity-toity, disdainful, or they have these other human emotions that are going on in their head, the way they look at us or what have you. And it's kind of humorous and insightful at the same time. It's like people who don't like cats, when they go over to someone's house who has cats, they will complain because cats will sit on their lap. And it will almost always be the case because, one, they don't like cats, and they think that cats react like people instead of like cats. And when we don't like somebody and we don't want their attention, we won't look at them, at least here. So we avoid eye contact. To a cat, when a cat is looking at a group of people, there's all these people staring at it, and then there's this one person who's like looking down, away, trying not to make eye contact. And in a cat's world, this is the invitation. This is the, hey, I'm safe here. I'm not challenging you at all. This is a safe space for you to be. I would like it if you jumped on my lap. And the cat will go and jump on their lap. And then the person's like, get off my lap. The poor cat's confused, doesn't know what's going on. But it's a, you know, it's a good example of how we do that with everything around us. So when we're trying to figure out our own story, every one of us is going to come up with a different method of doing this, obviously. Some people don't want to get rid of or give away, or I don't know what the right word is. They don't want to lose the story that they've concocted around them to explain certain things. Kind of like Ian's sister, it's a protective barrier, a shield, whether it's I'm not human, or I'm from somewhere else, or I'm a god, or I'm here to save everybody. I mean, I'm sure you can come up with examples for yourself of a lot of these types of things where we concoct a scenario, a story that helps us to cope with whatever it is that's going on. And it's not that they're bad in and of themselves, it's just that when we commit to them totally and then get to the point where we're not willing to examine them, that we're in trouble. If we can't examine our own narrative that we've come up with, then the narrative is in control and we're not. And that would be the key if you're looking at yourself. And that's certainly the key I look at with myself. So regardless of what it is, trying to get accurate information or verification, finding out that, only 1 in 10 million people think that that's likely versus 9 million out of 10 million people think that that's likely. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate or true either, because we know that cultures as a whole can have some pretty incredible delusions, which is the other thing that this brought up for me and some conversations that I've been having. When we talk about the Fae, and I talk about the fact that I don't put much weight into the stories that are told about them, and the reason, because people are the ones who have made these stories up, and the culture at the time that was around the making up of these stories and so forth is inclined to create terror and fear out of something that may not actually deserve it, because it served the culture at the time. It served whoever was in power, mostly the church at various times, to impress that story upon a group of people that you don't want to explore this because this is bad and we don't like it. And if you explore this, then you're saying that you don't like us, therefore we don't like you and you're going to go to hell or whatever. And I'm really surprised to discover how many people have a problem with that just because people told these stories and wrote them down and they've decided that they must be true. And you can look at a lot of different situations with the same type of eye. Like, most of us who are on this channel aren't Christian. There may be some of you out there, so this isn't to offend you or anything, but it's a book that was written by people that may or may not have any truth to it. There may be parts of it that are true and meaningful, but it may not be 100% accurate. And challenging that can put someone in a complete, existential crisis. Because if you believe something wholeheartedly, that this one thing that you have is true, and then you challenge that, then you're challenging the basis that you've created for your entire life, your personality, your meaning, and everything else, and people are afraid of letting go of that. One of the examples that I use for, larger issues that hopefully make it clear that we can have narratives that people believe in but aren't true and seem obvious later are like the burning times. And this is the time of year I talk about that anyway, because Samhain is coming, and it makes me think about all that kind of thing. So one of the documents that was used widely by the church during the burning times was the Malleus Maleficarum, and the witch's hammer, as it's translated. And it was considered a very accurate and complete document on how to determine if someone was a witch. And it was disseminated throughout the witch finders and witch hunters and clergy and so forth throughout Europe as the premier document that would help them discern who was a witch and who wasn't. And it's a very difficult document to read from this perspective from nowadays. I recommend doing it just because it's important to understand some of the historical foundations of the fear of witches. Because while some witches might fear the fae, most people fear witches. So we're kind of like, in the same boat, in a sense, as the fae might be, being unjustly judged by a perspective that doesn't have any truth to it anymore. So it seems obvious to me, for example, that people throughout Europe and some in the United States were virtually insane because they believed that all of these people that they murdered and tortured, it was justified because they were these evil creatures that worked with the devil. And to consider that that was wrong to them would have been heresy and would have ended up with them being burned at the stake. So survival was definitely a part of that entire piece. So, if we can look in the past and we can see with the clarity of distance and growth that something was obviously superstition and wrong, then we need to take that into our present and look at current things that we might hold as absolute truths and be willing to look at them as well and determine whether or not it's really a good belief system to utilize. And one of the things that people have a problem with witches in general, according to the readings and comments and so forth that I see here and there, is the fact that people of organized religion in general believe we have no system of ethics because we don't have anything written down in a single book that everyone says that they follow to say this is how I'll act and this is what I'll do and these are my rules for governing my behavior, because this is not that kind of a lifestyle or a path. This is a self-determined path. And the notion that a human being could actually navigate through life without clear instructions of what is and isn't okay to do and manage not to be a horrible person is an alien concept to a lot of people. They feel more comfortable having a set of rules to follow because then there's not a question. Is it okay to kill your neighbor? No, unless you're defending yourself. It's like, okay, is it okay to, they have their, and they don't follow all their rules either, but that's beside the point, is the fact we don't have them. And there's a wide range of ethical conduct within the magical community, whether it's witchcraft, paganism, Wicca, ceremonialists, whatever system it happens to be, Druidism, it doesn't matter. There's not a concrete, cohesive set of rules to follow. So we all have to come up with our own conduct. What we've decided is okay. And I think that that can leave some people feeling a little bit, I don't know, rudderless maybe is the word for that, and having to be more responsible for themselves than they would necessarily care to be. But that's what it is. If you're trying to follow this path, that's kind of what you've decided. And I could be one of the reasons why some people I've known have followed this path wholeheartedly and then gone back to something familiar, like their earlier religion, in one case Christianity, and then apparently that still didn't work, and so then they flipped back to paganism. So whether we believe the gods are real or not, whether we believe that myths are real or not, one thing we can all agree on is that the earth is real. I think that's our basis. That's my basis at any rate. The ground is real, the soil is real, the air is real, the trees are real. This is why grounding is so important, because it's the mental gymnastics that can go along with creating an inner narrative to explain all of reality and get so convoluted and separate from actual life itself that without that ability to come back to like this room, this space, this moment, this now, and all those ideas, do they function here, or do they have an impact here? Do they help anyone else? Are they just for me? And you can have your own personal mythology that you're following. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but that reality check is life. This, where we are, the breathing in and out, and the talk, it's like all that stuff. So, so this morning, when I left to go to my office, I went outside and I had my bowl of peanuts for the crows. And they immediately noticed I walked outside of the house. So that was kind of nice, because sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. And I threw my peanuts down, and the crows started coming from all these different directions. I saw them, and then I looked up and I saw all these other birds. They were small birds, and I realized they were all swallows. And they covered the wires, the power wires. And they were just all sitting there and just looking at me. They didn't come for the peanuts because they don't eat peanuts. And they weren't flying into the yard like the bird feeder or anything. They were just there, and I got this wonderful, uplifting feeling, that the world was saying, it's okay. You're still here, even with all the stuff we've been through this week. And so whether I'm right about why they came or not, that's a separate issue, right? I could be wrong. Maybe it just happened to be all those birds on the on the wire all at once, and they were not there when I came home. Maybe it had nothing to do with me, but I decided to take it as a sign and kind of an acknowledgement and a welcoming, and it made me feel better. So I'm not saying that we have to be able to definitively prove any narrative we use, but we need to be willing to set it aside if we find out it's not working for us anymore, and realize that that's what it is. It's something that we have created the narrative for ourselves to help us navigate our lives. And it's okay to change and transform. We don't have to be stuck in our narratives. So if at some point it isn't serving me, to see and acknowledge the other forms of consciousness that are out there, then I should be willing to look at that and let it go and move into something else. And that's what the path is about, that internal transformation and opening up to new possibilities. And we're all here learning something different. Um, and we all have different experiences of reality. And I think it's wonderful that we can connect and share some of our insights and have them have value to other people. I'm being very emotional. And it's sad to see somebody whose narrative is destroying them utterly, like his sister. And to recognize the things we don't have any power or control over. Humbling. So that's why it's important to remember what it is you can control. So you can control your words, the words you speak, the words you type. You can control your hands, the things you touch, the things you do. You can control your feet, the places you allow your feet to take you, the places you choose to walk. These are the things you can control. You can't control other people's paths. You can try and help, but they can choose to refuse, because we have free will, and so do they. And so the most important thing, I think, that we can learn is that the life we're leading is up to us, and the life we have is the one we make. And if we choose to try and force ourselves on other people, our life will be filled with conflict. But if we accept our own life force and walk it and try and experience it as completely and directly as we can, then at least we're doing something meaningful. We're growing. So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope all of you have a wonderful day and find something beautiful to experience. Your spirit's up. There's a lot of dark things around us. We can be the light for ourselves and for those we care about. So blessed be.